Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode.
I'm Bryan Cranston. Bob Mazur is a fascinating guy, a friend and a collaborator. We worked together on the movie The Infiltrator, based on his book. Will thrill you and maybe even frighten you. They are the real-life tales of a celebrated undercover officer. Our country is proud of him. I am proud of him. And after this discussion, I know that you'll be proud of him too. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the stimulating conversation with Robert Mazur.
Today's guest, Mr. Robert Mazur, is a renowned figure in the world of federal undercover and money laundering investigations. He is a former federal special agent who, throughout his career, worked for the Internal Revenue Service, the United States Customs Service, and the Drug Enforcement Administration. His area of expertise consists of infiltrating both the Medellin and Cali drug cartels. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller book titled The Infiltrator. This book details his investigation and experience during his time spent infiltrating the Medellin Cartel. Bob was deeply involved in drug trafficking and money laundering investigations of Medellin Cartel leader Pablo Escobar and other high-level members of his ruthless narco-terror cartel. This book was later adapted into the movie titled The Infiltrator, starring Bryan Cranston, who portrayed Bob, and John Leguizamo, who portrayed Bob's partner and friend, Emir Abreu. Bob served as an executive producer for the film. Bob's investigation also targeted corrupt, high-ranking officials within the international banking system who were complicit in the money laundering activities of numerous drug cartels and criminal organizations. Bob's career and achievements make him a highly distinguished guest with unparalleled expertise in undercover investigations and combating money laundering at both the national and international levels. Bob's career is marked by his courageous undercover work and his significant contributions to law enforcement efforts against organized crime and financial corruption. His insights into drug smuggling and money laundering investigations are invaluable, making him a highly respected figure in his field. Bob, welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. And for my old school U.S. Customs Service friends out there that are listening, I don't even have to tell you or mention how legendary Bob is in our world of the previous U.S. Customs Service. Could you just maybe give us a little bit about yourself and tell us how you got into law enforcement from the beginning? Like, what drew you to law enforcement?
Yeah, well, it was odd to say, but it was an accident. I was in college. It was, the economic cycle. It was tough times. I needed to get a summer job and hopefully something during the semester. And I went to a jobs board, and here was a notice about a co-op position with an agency I'd never heard of, the IRS Intelligence Division, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's really not. It's what's now the criminal investigations. And I went for the interview and got the job. And back in the day, they really kind of put you with a very senior person, and you did the important things like photocopying and putting things in folders. But as I stayed in the office, I came to recognize that this was the agency that was most responsible for putting Al Capone behind bars, in that they did the forensic accounting that proved that he was not reporting huge amounts of illegal income. And one of the cases that was being worked on by another group nearby, so I'd hear about it all the time, were guys who were working on a bank, chemical bank. And it involved the fact that a heroin trafficker by the name of Frank Lucas, who was the biggest heroin trafficker at the time in New York. American Gangster is the movie with Denzel Washington portraying that heroin trafficker. And his runners were bringing duffel bags full of cash to Chemical Bank. And they weren't reporting the transactions. And they had just previously been put on notice because they were taking cash from an Italian-American organized crime group. So I began to see how, if you followed the money, it would ultimately take you to the people of power. When I finished my college education, which was a BA in business administration finance and not a criminology major, and I would have otherwise been an accountant, but I went back to IRS. I got a job as a special agent, and I was with them for the first 11 years of my career. And when you're in Manhattan, you're working some pretty big cases. And I think I got some of the most valuable training of my career through IRS, because it was the portion of criminal investigations that a lot of our brothers and sisters in law enforcement cringe when they hear about it, and that is putting the paper together, following the money, and so I got that experience, and I wound up working on a task force joint with Customs, IRS and Customs, on a thing called Operation Greenback. And we were chasing the biggest money launderers that we could identify, principally trying to focus on the Medellin Cartel. And I remember writing an affidavit for a search warrant. And it was, I'm in IRS, so it's got to go through 15 levels of review. And by the time it gets back to me, the PC is not fresh. So I talked to my customs colleague and I said, well, how do you guys do this? He goes, well, I write the affidavit and then I take the search warrant to the magistrate's home and he reviews it and we get a warrant. And I said, you're kidding me. So I said, I've got to work for that agency. So then I went over to U.S. Customs Office of Enforcement, and I knew the guys and the ladies that were there because I'd worked on that joint task force with them for quite some time. So for me, it was really just changing the color of my badge. Had a great time working with Customs. Wound up probably the most notable case was the one that I did, Operation Sea Chase, which is the story of the Infiltrator. And actually before that, the cases that I got the opportunity to work on were dream cases. One of the most prominent lawyers in the Tampa Bay area, big time divorce lawyer who was also financing and laundering for a pretty big drug organization. And for the first time in my life, I got to do a search warrant on a law office, which is a pretty unusual thing to do, and snagged a bunch of Swiss bank records, put a lot of things together, seized a big resort out on the beach, and just had a blast. And ultimately, I decided that after some experiences in the customs operation, that I thought for me personally, it might be best to move on to DEA, and I did. And I got the opportunity. I was really solicited to go there by the ASAC in Tampa because he wanted me to be the lead undercover in another long-term undercover operation, this time going after the Cali cartel. And I felt I had some unfinished business as far as I was concerned, documenting the, I think, very active involvement of international banks, lawyers, bankers, financial service providers in the laundering of trillions of dollars in illicit funds. So I took the opportunity, went back, did that undercover operation, which unfortunately, due to corruption, almost got me killed, and then decided I would move on to the private sector.
How long were you with Customs, and then how long were you with DEA? Would you mind saying that?
Yeah, not at all. Let's see. I think I went over to Customs in 83, 91. I guess it's about 8 years in U.S. Customs Office of Enforcement, and about the same amount of time in DEA.
Okay.
Yeah. So the thing that I think really helped me uh, with respect to working as a long-term undercover agent is that both the IRS and Customs took undercover work, I believe, in a different light than maybe in DEA. And DEA didn't have an undercover school when I got there. I think IRS and Customs recognize that it's a science, and that it's also something that is a type of resource that you only use when you have no other option, that being the long-term undercover technique. And there's so many aspects of it that I was blessed. I went through the first undercover school I went through. They not only had the trainers, they also had former long-term undercover agents and psychologists. And my mentor, the guy who was there in my class, was Joe Pistone, former FBI agent, subject of the book and the movie Donnie Brasco. And Joe and I have been friends ever since. Actually, we are on the speaking circuit together now. And one of the things that he drummed into my head, and it's extremely important, and that is that when you're working undercover, think trial from day one. Don't think that this is, this guy's going to roll. I don't have to worry about it. I can cut corners. I can do this. I can do that. No, can't do that whatsoever. When you start cutting corners, you start making mistakes, and it's really something that you need to undertake in a well thought out plan. At Customs, I wrote the undercover proposal called Operation Sea Chase, and it was a very complex operation. I got that opportunity because on that task force working with me was a guy who became my partner, Amir Abreu. And Amir is, bar none, the best undercover agent that's ever put on a badge. Absolutely no doubt in my mind. Wow. I'm the dot the I, cross the T guy. I have to have everything in order. Amir walks in a room and everybody says, I'm not sure what crimes he commits, but he definitely is a criminal. He doesn't have to worry about trying to convince people. So what happened in the very beginning is that we had an informant from Colombia who, and this is on the Infiltrator story, who really had access to some very well-connected money launderers who did not have the resources to be able to move 1/10 of the money that they had access to. The money broker he knew was a guy who had gone to high school with many of the people sitting on the board of the cartel. And he had an import-export company, but he and his father and his brother were, small time. And so Amir is introduced to him as a guy who can get monies laundered. And we came up with the plan. I came up with a plan, and that is that, okay, Amir, you're going to deal with these guys for a while, and you're going to tell them that your boss is the guy who helps you to get these accounts, but your boss doesn't want to meet anybody. He's never going to talk to you. But his boss owns is a part of all these companies. He's an Italian from New York. They've got a brokerage firm, jewelry business. They got a mortgage company, a finance company. They had all kinds of stuff. Man, if you could ever meet him and he'd work with you directly, there's no limit to the amount of money that could be laundered. But he works for his family, and he doesn't want to meet anybody else, not outside of the people that he deals with. Playing hard to get is pretty powerful. When you're on top of people and you're trying to get them to deal with you, a lot of your listeners who or agents who might have been in short-term buy-bust type cases, and that your supervisor is constantly telling him, hey man, let's make something happen here. Call that guy, do
Right.
this, do this, do this. And when it comes to the higher level people, that's a big turnoff. There's nothing more powerful than to say, my boss can help you, but he doesn't want to meet you, and we're going to have to keep the limit small. So Amir was picking up money, but this guy couldn't move more than probably $50,000 in a week, and it was being smurfed, and it was, they were doing all kinds of stuff. So now Amir starts taking a little bit more, 100, 150, and we're going down this thing for probably at least 4 months. And meanwhile, I've had three sources that were extremely important to this case. Two of them were former Italian-American organized crime guys who I had prosecuted. Most of my informants were people who I prosecuted. They knew I'd treat them fairly. Some of them went to jail for 5-10 years, even though they cooperated. But the fact of the matter is, I never screwed them. I was always honest with them. And always told them, even after they were taken down, listen, I'm only doing my job, and my job now is to let you know that if you want to get your sentence reduced and you want to provide honest, substantial assistance, I'm here to work with you. But not unless you're going to play. I got to be in 100%. So I had a guy who used to be a bodyguard for a capo, who went into the witness protection program, spent 5+ years in jail. Had come out. It was another 5 years or so since then, and he was working as a source of mine. The only reason that they didn't kill him is that the capo was moving a lot of coke that he wasn't telling his bosses about, and he was using a lot of the coke. So he broke all the traditional organized crime rules, and so my guy didn't wind up getting whacked. And another guy who was a little bit more on the white collar side. And then we had also I would say a concerned citizen. He used to be an officer in a bank and now is in the private sector. And he had a bunch of businesses. And my theory on this undercover operation was, what it's like on budgets, government budgets.
Right.
They're going to give you $1.98 and expect you to do a $10 million job. So I knew that if we got this Attorney General's exemption approved, that once we started making undercover profits, we'd be able to use those to defray the costs of the undercover operation. So I didn't need a lot of startup money, and I really didn't want to get more than 30 grand, because if I got more than 30 grand, then it had to go to the headquarters level for overview. Those were the rules back then. And the last thing I wanted was headquarters involved in this thing. I didn't want it to become political. So we got the operation approved, and now I'm embedded in real businesses. So it's not storefronts where the lights go on when the bad guys are in town and the lights go off when they're gone.
Right.
An investment company, a mortgage brokerage business, a jewelry chain with 30 locations on the East Coast. We had an air charter service and a private jet, and even a brokerage firm with a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. So, this is before 9/11. So when bad guys came in town, I could take them right on the floor of the exchange. And having worked, I worked in a bank, I worked in a brokerage firm before I was in law enforcement. So I kind of knew that world. I didn't really have to lie a lot. And that's one of the things you want to do. You want to create if you're going to have a long-term persona, it's got to be as close to you as it possibly can. The less number of lies that you tell, the better off you're going to be. I couldn't have been an 18-wheeler truck driver. I had to be a guy in the business world because I'm a business administration finance major. I've got a lot of accounting background, worked all those white-collar cases, worked in a bank and a brokerage firm. So I was kind of a natural for the position of being the corrupt businessman who was a money launderer. And with that setup, and then with the funding that we had and with the sources that we had all the resources we needed to really move up the line. And one of the things that
if I could interrupt you for our listeners there, that you and I are familiar with this, but for our listeners that are not, we're going to be talking substantially about money laundering. And you mentioned another term, smurfing. Could you just briefly, for those that are not aware of what money laundering is, just give a basic explanation?
Sure. Okay, so money laundering is a process, and there are many different manners in which that process can be operated, an infinite number. But one of the simplest, most fundamental, and this is taking funds from an illicit source and concealing and disguising them in a fashion where you ultimately use them in a manner by which you have hidden their illicit origins. So there are ways you can do that. I mean, there's simple ways. I mean, you could run a casa de cambio, a money service business, taking cash and just provide your client who gave the cash checks or wire transfers that then can be moved on to accounts, and then the balances in those accounts can be moved on to somewhere else. You know, you might have a situation where traditionally, you mentioned smurfing. We dubbed them back that had to be probably in the early 80s. We dubbed them Smurfs because they would typically, you'd have a Colombian group, a family, maybe 10 people. They'd show up at a car in Queens or someplace where there was a large Latin American community, Colombian community. The guy would have maybe $500,000 in the trunk. Each person would be given $50,000 and a map with a list of where the post offices, the banks where you could buy cashier's checks, where you could get traveler's checks. And they would go around and they would use their each of them would use their 50,000, and they would buy what we call non-depository checks. So these are cashier's checks, money orders. These are checks that come from an account that you are not the depositor to. So you might buy checks. Now, people who are not smart will buy them in round numbers, 1,000, 2,000. You go over 3,000, and 3,000, they're going to start writing down your ID and stuff. Smart Smurfs will go out and they'll keep the amounts definitely under 2,000, make them in odd amounts, like it looks like you're getting a money order to pay a bill, $1,230.74. You want to mix it up, and because you don't want to draw attention. So at the end of the day, they come back with a small stack of negotiable instruments instead of all that cash. And then those negotiable instruments are moved on to the next part of the process. When I was really working heavily with the trust of the cartels, they would FedEx to me boxes of those Smurf checks. So I might get $1 million worth of cashier's checks, money orders, and then I would deposit them into my check cashing business. And then I could move the money out of there onto other accounts and then ultimately get that, to them. But there's less profit laundering non-depository checks than there is for cash, because you've got a harder business, to do the cash.
Right.
So you can have as complicated, I mean, the Cali cartel had the most complicated money laundering system that I had the most interesting conversation I ever had with a corrupt banker. And it tells you how simple it is that some people can launder money. We're at a club called Regine's, and it was a big time club all over the world. I think she had 25 or so locations. And I'm at the Miami Regine's with a fairly senior guy from the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. And he says to me, "You know who the biggest money launderer in the US is, don't you? Hey, I'm this eager young agent working undercover. I can't wait to get this and bring the bone back to the office." And he goes, "Well, it's the Federal Reserve." I said, "The Federal Reserve? What are you talking about?" He goes, "Bob, this war on drugs is just complete garbage and hypocrisy. This is what's actually going on. And your listeners can Google this and they can find it. And it's true. And it was going on." So he goes, "In Colombia, the central bank has a window called the anonymous window. There was another name for it as well, beside the anonymous window. And so you can, if you have the right connections, you can take cash to the central bank and they will exchange for you your dollars for Colombian pesos, and they'll give you a good rate, and they'll do it right away. The sinister window is the other name. So Google the sinister window Colombia. Okay. So now they're taking in all this cash at a time when it was illegal for a Colombian citizen to have a dollar account. So, and as this banker tells me, he goes, now they're taking in, $100 million a month or more. And he goes, do you know what they do with it? They shrink wrap it and they put it on pallets and they fly it to the United States. And as any central bank that has an account with the U.S. Federal Reserve, it's deposited to their dollar account for their credit. Now, why did the central bank want to do that? It's a 28% inflation rate in Colombia. Hold that money in pesos. At the end of the year, they get 28% less value. Hold it in dollars, it's actually going to increase in value. So they had this plan that went on for years, and they took in all this cash, flew it into the Federal Reserve, and it went into the account. And as the banker said to me, he goes, Bob, don't you think that there's someone with enough sense at the U.S. Federal Reserve that scratches their head and goes, okay, we're getting hundreds of millions of dollars from the Central Bank of Colombia, a country that doesn't allow its citizens to have U.S. dollar accounts. Where do you think they're getting those dollars from, all that currency? And he was right. Sure. It was true. And it happened all the time. And it does happen all the time because central banks oftentimes, when they have economic problems, hold their nose, turn their blind eye, and move money in for the most evil of the evil people that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you have Emir in this instance here. We're talking the Medellin Cartel, and we're talking Pablo Escobar. So this is a substantial. This isn't a mom and pop organization. This isn't a local, like we call them here in the Midwest, a hillbilly, running some sort of drug organization. This is legit, squared away, real deal. An organization here. And for listeners that aren't familiar with Pablo Escobar, this guy was a Colombian drug lord and narco terrorist who was the founder of the Medellin Cartel. And I know you know all this, but for those folks that aren't really familiar, this guy was the king of cocaine, and he was one of the wealthiest criminals in the entire world. And I think at the time of his height in that empire, I think it was calculated that the equivalent of the money that he amassed was about, in today's dollars, $70 billion. So these are the people that Emir is slowly introducing you into with this process that you just described as money laundering and these banks. So I interrupted you a bit earlier. If you would just continue on with, now that the listeners are familiar with money laundering and how it works, how did you, Emir introduces you, said, hey, this guy can do great things for you, but he's behind the scenes. Pick up where we stopped there and just kind of explain how you progressed through.
Sure. So he opens the door. And one of the first people I meet is a guy by the name of Roberto Alcaeno. Roberto is an Argentinian Sicilian who he's from Argentina. He's got a jewelry business, super high-end jewelry business in LA. He's also involved in real estate. He's also involved in fight promoting. I sit down with him and I explain to him I need to be handling a certain amount of your money in investments, blah, 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 blah. But what was most important was I actually met him. There were 3 organized crime drug enforcement task force attempts to get close to him in the past. And nobody could get anywhere near him. I'm sitting with him face to face. It's me,
you're
Amir,
slicing through that guy. Yep, you're getting right to him there. You're slicing right through those layers.
Yep, and Roberto was a transporter for Pablo Escobar, for the Ochoa brothers. Those were the main people he worked for. And it didn't go quick and easy with him. You have to have patience. I met him in August. I would say it wasn't until 4 months later, when I really got the opportunity to start working with him. And it's interesting. He would always say, "Hey, we're going to be doing a lot of business, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that." I knew he was moving thousands of kilos at a time, and we're getting, maybe $500,000 every other week from him. And so eventually, I talked to the former wise guy who played the role of my cousin. If anybody sees the Infiltrator movie, there's a guy there who plays my cousin and a
He's the
bodyguard.
bearded guy that drives
Yeah.
you around, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I've forgotten what they called him there, maybe Joe. But anyway, no, I don't think it was. I've forgotten what they called him. Might have been, well, the guy's real name we used was Dominic. That's so anyway, so I go to the real Dominic and I go, this is what's happening. Did you ever have that kind of a situation? And how do you get someone who makes promises of doing big things and being a real confidant? How do you get them to actually produce? And he goes, that's easy. So he walks into his stand-up safe in his bedroom. Of course, everybody has one of those, right? And he comes out with this little paisley jewelry box, cloth jewelry box, and he opens it up, and it's a cross, 1/4 inch to probably 2 inches, 3 inches high, 2 inches wide, 1/4 inch gold, diamonds all over it. He goes, it's worth 25 G's. He goes, what you need to do is the next time he tells you that you guys are in it together, you're partners, you're the closest of the close, you're willing to die for each other, blah, blah, blah. He goes, you got to give him a gift. So I'm thinking, Customs are going to let me give him something worth like a 19-inch black and white TV.
Right.
That's about it. So the source goes to me, I'll tell you what, I'm going to loan you this cross. And at the end of the operation, when you take him down, just give me back my cross. And I said, I can't just informally do that. So I went back to my ASAC, and this is a guy I'd known for years. Really good guy, Paul O'Brien. Paul's most important thing was get your time sheets in and your car reports in on time. If that's done, I love you. So
then you're golden.
So, of course, being a former IRS guy, mine were always in on time. So
I was the opposite. I was that other guy.
So I said, Paul, take a look at this document. It's just a receipt to borrow from this source, this cross. And if we lose the cross, he doesn't want any money for what he's doing for us on cases anyway. We need to put him in for a $25,000 reward, so he's flush. Somehow or another, I got Paul to sign the thing. And so now I've got the cross.
That's pretty impressive.
So typical time, Roberto comes to Florida. I have a house that's really nice because it happens to be the house of my bodyguard. And so we go around town. We fly on the private jet to Teterboro Airport. We get off, walk down. Another source of mine had limos. So we get in a limo. We drive down to Wall Street. We go up into the brokerage firm. There's probably 40 people working there. And I'm on their roles as a consultant to the owner. So we go in, and then I take them onto the floor of the stock exchange. I got a membership through the one of the other sources to the Columbus Club in Manhattan. So the joke used to be, you need to either be a politician or a crook or both in order to be a member. So, and then after that, he wanted me to drop him off at his apartment, which was right by the UN. So we're in the limo, we get out, and I said, Roberto, you've told me many times that we are blood brothers, that you trust me, and I've trusted you. But the fact of the matter is, we're doing peanuts, buddy. And I don't understand what it is. Don't you trust me? Yes, yes, brother. We're in this together. And I would do anything for you. You're like a son to me. Okay, well, if that's the case, then my family has this tradition, and we bless relationships like this because, and I looked right at him and I said, I'm prepared to die for you. Are you prepared to die for me? That's active listening, and you don't say anything.
Sure.
Of course, it feels like he's got to say something.
What was the initial reaction you observed from that?
It was like, of course, it's gonna be. I said, well, here's the gift. Now, this guy's a high-end jeweler. He opens it up, and his eyes got the size of saucers. And, oh, Bob, you didn't have to do this. I said, yes, I did, because this is an allegiance of the heart. And you just need to know that I and my people are with you. And we need to know that you're with us 100%, no matter what needs to be done. Yes, it's going to be. The rivers of money opened up after that.
Wow, that was the significant push that it took.
That was
the big
push. The trials in these cases were very, very long. The longest one was 6 months. And in that trial, I got on the witness stand in the middle of March, and I got off in the middle of June. I testified every single court day for 3 months.
That had to be exhausting.
It was. Every single, well, not every single one, but Amir and I had recorded like 1,200 conversations and probably 200 face-to-face. And a lot of those were video. So all of that got introduced, and I was able to do a Freedom of Information Act request and get all of that stuff. So I've got a clip of a video of me and Roberto alone in the in one of the undercover houses, and he basically invites me to go down to Colombia with him. He was going to introduce me to Pablo and to the rest of the people. But you can imagine what the agency said upon that request.
Just simply getting a passport and your undercover identity would be an obstacle, I would think.
Well, I had a passport, but I'll tell you a funny story about the passport. And this goes back to, you only do things. I remember when I went through the first undercover school, the IRS undercover school, there was a guy there, seasoned guy, nice guy named Joe Hinton, did a lot of undercover work. And Joe said, listen, there are going to be people in headquarters who can get you this, can get you that, can get you the other thing. I'm telling you right now, to the extent that you can get it yourself, because you know you're not going to make a mistake. You have no idea where that stuff comes from that you're going to get from headquarters. Well, moral of the story, I had gotten, it was a baby death. I had the birth certificate. I had my driver's license. People might wonder, how do you get a driver's license if you didn't have a driver's license? Well, back then, way before 9/11, it wasn't that unusual for somebody in New York not to have a driver's license and still be, in their 20s, because everybody takes public transportation. So, I had my story for the Department of Motor Vehicles. But anyway, the one thing I couldn't get, I didn't think I could get, was a passport. So Amir and I needed passports, and headquarters got them, and they sent them to us. And here I open it up. They're sequentially numbered, issued on the same date from Washington, D.C. I said, there's no way in hell I'm using this.
Right.
So I said, here, Amir will keep his. I'm not taking that one. I'll take my ID. I'll go down to Miami. I'll go to the passport office. Believe me, I'll walk out of there with a passport. And I did. So now I got my passport. So 1 month before the end of the operation, I'm traveling to the UK, and I'm going through Heathrow. Now, once we had them, I said, I need to get some passport stamps in this thing. And because we had it, but I hadn't used it for probably more than almost a year. So I had it, and but now I needed to get stamps in. So I go, why don't we send it around to our counterparts at different embassies and get them to work with the agencies that are there and get the stamps right. No, we don't have to worry about that. We're gonna send it to the FBI lab. I said, okay. They send it to the, just give us the dates and the countries you want. Okay, fine. I give it to them. Now, with that, I'm now in 1 month from the end. I'm I'm at Heathrow, and there's an immigration officer there. He's flipping through, and he just looks up and he goes, "Where'd you get the phony chops?" I said, "Excuse me." He goes, "Yeah, this one here is phony. It was a UK stamp." I said, "Sir, I don't know. I just give my passport like I do to people like you, and they give it back to me. If there's a problem, it was one they did." So then he hands me a body cavity search form, and he goes, "Here we go. We're either going there or you're going to start talking to me." And I said, "Well, I guess we're going there." So I filled this thing out. Now they take me back into a private area and go into this thing, and there's two guys there who are examining me. And I couldn't help but try to make light of this. So they have me bend over, and the guy goes, "Okay, everything looks all right." I said, "You're not the first one to tell me that." And then they got pissed off. So now they're taking my briefcase apart, and there's a Nagra hidden inside the briefcase.
That's what I was going to ask.
They find it. So now it's just me and them, and I go, "Okay, I'm a customs undercover agent, and I'm working with your customs agency, and I'm working undercover on a case." And the guy looks at the other guy. He goes, "Hey, mate, did you ever hear a funnier story than that?" They didn't believe me. They weren't going to believe me. So then finally he goes like, "Can you give me the name of somebody at the embassy? And if he's not on the embassy list, don't even bother to talk to us." I get thrown in a lockup, and with an Aborigine that had something wrong with his paperwork. So anyway, so now they've realized that I'm for real. And John Luxick, I think the guy's name is, came from the embassy, and they tore up all their reports, and they got me through. But the moral of the story is that if you can do it yourself, do it yourself.
Because that makes complete sense.
Yeah, somebody sends you a credit card for American Express from headquarters, darn well somebody at American Express has a folder that says if it's overdrawn, call this number at customs.
Right. There's a record somewhere. Yep.
Yeah. So, there's a million and one things that you really need to focus on, the small details to avoid what otherwise may, well become a nightmare. And
sure, my simple hiccup. Yep.
Yeah. My last Roberto story is that so Roberto told me so much about his operations that he gave me every last detail about what's called a pipeline. So that's a group of different legitimate appearing businesses that are used as a pipeline to move thousands and thousands of kilos of coke. So they had a lab in Bolivia who was producing, I don't know, I think it was like 6,000 kilos a month. So they're flying small planes out of there. He was in business with Fabio at that one. To northern Argentina. They truck it from there to Buenos Aires. Then they take it to an anchovy packing plant, and they commercially pack it in cans that are like 23-pound cans of anchovies that are sold to restaurants. And then from there, it goes to the Northeast, to Spain, and to Italy. So he lets me know that there's a load that's going to be coming into New York. And the reason that he tells me is now I'm like his major money guy. And he knows that I have other clients. So if my resources are backed up and he gets a load in, he's got 10 days to get the money down to the owners. He could be screwed if I don't have if I'm not ready.
Sure.
And so he told me about that far out. I kept giving information to the New York office of customs. Tommy Loretto was the supervisor there. I knew Tom he used to be in IRS with me. And they couldn't find it. And then one night, I didn't go home very often to my real home. maybe a day or a day and a half, about a month. And I happened to be there. We had call forwardings set up so that a phone would ring in my closet that would otherwise make him think that it was Miami, at my undercover house there. Anyway, so I answer and it's Roberto. And he says, Bob, my girlfriend's about to have the baby. Now, I knew all three of his girlfriends. None of them were pregnant. And I knew his wife. So dummy me is like, I go, well, does Gloria know? You know, Gloria's his wife. And he goes, no, compadre, listen to me. The baby's ready to be delivered. Oh, okay. And I need you to be ready. And I'm running back and forth to Boston, but be ready right away. So I called Tom back at Customs. I go, Tom, don't sleep tonight. I'm telling you, it's on a dock. It's from Buenos Aires. It's anchovies, and they're packed commercially. How many can there possibly be?
Right.
So he calls me back, and it was in Camden, New Jersey. They found it.
Wow.
And I said, okay, don't take it apart because he was there when it was loaded. And of course, that got ignored. And they've got to. I mean, they have to be able to substantiate what's there, where it's going, whatever.
Verify it, yeah.
Yeah, so they do that, and then they put it all back together again, and they deliver it to a warehouse in Chelsea, downtown Manhattan. And there's 2,300 pounds of coke inside this stuff, a little more than a ton. And so Roberto shows up at the warehouse, and he looks around, and they use Customs undercover guys to be warehouse men moving boxes. And he looked at them. He told me later, he goes, Bob, I knew they were cops. Their hands looked like pillows. They were gringos. They were speaking English. I'd never seen them before. And he goes, the second I saw them, I just started slowly walking toward the door. And then he did. He beat feet. He jumped in a cab. They chased him all over the place. They finally get him like 3 or 4 hours later. And he gets arrested. And he's held with no bond. And everybody.
And that's where I'm sorry. That's where it differs in the movie, right? He didn't attend your wedding that was set up and wasn't captured at that. He was captured at that incident right there that you're describing.
He was a month before the end. Okay. Yeah. And so we all went, you know, Tuto, the Cuban, me, a bunch of other guys I knew that, you know, worked with Roberto. We all, as they say, went to the mattresses. We just stayed in our houses. We didn't leave. You know, you're always, you know, if you're playing the bad guy, you're worried about who's going to get arrested next, whose phones are being tapped. Is Roberto cooperating? And then about 4 days later, and I had a method through which I could communicate with Roberto and his wife, and codes and pay phones and all that kind of stuff. So now she tells me, she goes, oh, I just met with Roberto at the Tombs and in Manhattan, the jail. And he has a message for you. And I was like, oh, God. And she goes, well, he feels you're the only one he can trust and he wants you to take over. Wow. And so here's a list of the distributors and who's holding what. And you can work with Tuto to get, you know, more information. I need your help to pay the lawyers, and I need your help to pay the suppliers. So now it's kind of like a scene from the Austin Powers movie. I am now Mini-Me to Roberto. And so I'm having agents in different parts of the country meet with their couriers, pick up cash from them. Of course, now they're getting identified, so they're going to go down at the end.
Did that just catch you completely off guard, that role being placed upon you like that? Did you have any inkling that anything like that would occur?
No, I never.
That had to be just shocking.
It was, you know, by that time, not that long, about a month before that, another one of Roberto's guys, Juan Tabone. So Juan, his wife was married to the niece of Gacha Rodriguez, one of the members of the Medellin Cartel. And he was a big, he was very close to Roberto, and he was a big guy involved in Santeria. So he believed in this witchcraft, kind of a cross between witchcraft and Catholicism. And he said to me, listen, before we do much more, I need you to come with me to meet my padron, my godfather, the priest. And I knew what he wanted him to feel my spirit. So now I'm talking to Amir, and Amir goes, Bob, don't go. He goes, if they say that you're bad.
Yeah, if they don't like your spirit, it's not a good outcome, probably.
Not a good outcome, yeah. So by now I have a disease called information is my heroin. You don't want your undercover agent to have that. I mean, everybody goes like, oh, you like to do this because you wanted to go to those hotels and the jets and that. No, I wanted it because I wanted the information, man. Right. I mean, we haven't even talked about the bank, and we will get the opportunity. Maybe we can down the road do another segment, but I'm dealing with a financial advisor who is also the financial advisor of Manuel Noriega. And I'm getting all kinds of information about where Noriega's money is being hidden. I'm getting information about payments that are being made back to Pakistani royalty, actually to the president of Pakistan. I'm getting all kinds of information that you wouldn't possibly imagine. So for me, it was the next piece of information has to be bigger and better, and the risk has to be greater. Because if not, then I'm not doing my job. I'm not maximizing out. So I go, you know what? I'm going to go with Juan. And so I went alone. Stupid me. I go, I hadn't even been to the house before. So we don't know what the house looks like. We don't know anything. But information's my heroin, and it's got me high. So what I do, I'm there with him. It's in an area called Sweetwater, which was pretty heavy Honduran low-income area. And so we get in the house, and the door closes, and now I realize, it's bird caged. There are burglar bars on every window and every door, and there ain't no way out.
That's got to be a bad feeling.
Yeah. So now we're in there. There's only one person in the house, and that's the priest. But he has me sit out in the living room, and he goes into this room, and then he comes out and he goes, Padron will see you now. So I go into the room, and the altar's there. You can see blood from sacrifices of chickens and goats, and candles are burning and all this other stuff. So the guy just grabs my shoulders and stares me in the face for a while. And then he motions me to leave, and then he and Juan stay in there. And then Juan comes out later and comes to me, and he goes, Padron says you're a good and honorable man, so we will do business.
And you're like, whew.
Yeah. Well, and I in my mind, I was good and honorable. I just happened to be good and honorable for the good guys, not the bad guys.
That's true. That's true. And was this incident the basis for the scene in the Infiltrator movie where you were side by side with an individual?
Yeah, but there was no other person there that got shot in the head. Yeah. It was just me and the priest and Juan, his disciple.
But I'm putting myself in your shoes in that real scenario, and that had to be uncomfortable enduring that and getting through that.
I had one situation where I was with a bad guy when I was accused of being a DEA undercover agent, which I could honestly say I wasn't because I was a customs undercover agent. But this guy's sitting across from me at a table, and I opened my briefcase. I had given some bank records. And as I opened it up, and I had told the office, listen, because this is that Nagra recorder, and then Nagras are big and heavy. And I told them, listen, the Velcro is giving out every now and then. And, we got to make sure this thing is working good. And unfortunately, I was told it was fixed, but I don't think it was. So I opened this thing up, and the Velcro lets loose, and the Nagra falls into the briefcase. He's on the other side of the briefcase. And I'm trying to act like my hair's not on fire, putting this thing back together again, because I got a Nagra and a nest of wires sitting there in front of me. And I just got it back in time when he was getting impatient and came around to get his records. So, but you can't show that. And
Sure.
you also can't, you have to train yourself not to think like a cop. It's not an easy thing to do. In that same meeting, I had been accused. My two biggest clients were Gerardo Moncada and Fernando Galeano. For your listeners who are Narcos fans, which most of them I'm sure are, last two episodes, first year, Gerardo Moncada and Fernando Galeano are featured. They were the main managers for Pablo Escobar's routes at that time.
Wow.
And
wow, that's significant.
Yeah. And they had counter surveillance out. I had just come back. We had meetings in Paris, and one of the guys who was in the meetings for the cartel was Pablo Escobar's lead attorney, his number one consigliere, and a couple of other guys who were very close to him. They worked for Moncada and they worked for Escobar. And so we had gotten the go-ahead to get what was going to cumulatively be about $100 million. And it was all coming into New York. And it was like $1 million in the morning, $2 million in the afternoon. And I'm begging the New York people. I hardly ever went to an office, but I did in the New York office because I was so concerned about surveillance. Roberto told me, listen, we always have our people out there looking for the gringos. He goes, you make sure your people are looking for guys who are between their late 20s, early 30s. They're going to be white guys. They're going to be in good shape. They're going to have pullover solid shirts with collars. They're going to have jeans on, jogging shoes, and fanny packs. That's what you need to be looking for. So I go into this room where the surveillance team is, and everybody's got their uniform on. And I go, guys, you got to mix it up. You know, now I'm from New York, but I've been away from there for a while. And so they didn't know probably that I was originally from New York. I went to school in Illinois, and they made so much fun of me in Illinois with my New York accent that they scared it out.
I can imagine.
So, yeah, I mean, just a couple of used guys and forget it.
Right.
So now they're out there, they got their counter surveillance. They say, you know, hey, you know, we're from New York. We know how this goes, blah, 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 blah. Counter surveillance picks him up. Moncada's in the background on a phone call to Amir, screaming that I have to be a DEA undercover agent because they identified all of the agents that were out there in their cars. So now that's what makes me go to this meeting when the Niagara Falls out. But I'm talking to a guy who's one of Moncada's most trusted people. Now, how are you going to react to an accusation that you're a cop or that you are in an organization that has informants and cops?
Right. What do you do?
Yeah. So what I did was I said, listen, the information you have is extremely important for me. Number one, I don't give a shit that there's $97 million still waiting. I'm not taking another nickel. You're going to have somebody else is going to have to handle that. Until we get this resolved and until we eliminate the problem, no more money moves anywhere. Now, I don't think the problem's on my side. I suspect, I mean, it's just as easy your side as mine, but I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you need to do the same due diligence I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a situation where the same people who are out there are going to think they're going to get an amount of money. And I'm going to have other people out there watching. You need to set something up on your end. We need to find where the weakness is. If it's on my side, I promise you, I will eliminate it. You need to promise me. We need to get this resolved, or just don't do any more business, period. How many cops are going to say, keep your $97 million? You know?
Not many that I know of.
Yeah. A lot of them are going to say, you know what? It's probably your guys. Your guys are the ones that did it. I know these people, blah, 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 blah. That's not a good idea. That's a cop.
How quickly did you come up with that and say that? Was that in a matter of minutes, or was that over an extended time frame? I mean, that's genius.
I think it's cumulative starting with the day that I was blessed with the leadership that had the foresight to put a good quality undercover school together, and to give me the opportunity to be the sponge around the people who've been there, done that.
Right.
And to realize also, one of the biggest, most important things that I beg anybody and everybody who does undercover work needs to know. Don't ever forget this. The bad guy is smarter than you. That's it.
That's a
The
great
bad guy's
point.
smarter than you. If you don't operate in an umbrella in a bubble where you know I'm weaker, I have to study harder, I have to put more time in, I have to be more prepared. The best thing that happened to me was I was a B student through college. I had to work my ass off to get a B. There were people I knew who got A's and never really worked. But I know one thing, nobody works any harder than I will. And that's what you need to do, because it's gonna pay off. Because being lucky simply means being absolutely, totally prepared when an unexpected opportunity comes your way. That's being lucky. And I was lucky a lot of times throughout this thing. It wasn't planned. It was lucky. And I am so thankful. One, I had the best undercover partner in the world, Emir Abreu. And two, I had leadership that gave me the opportunity to take chances and had faith in me and knew I was going to do the right thing.
That's the difference between successes and failures. You just hit the nail on the head. A partner that's knowledgeable and trustworthy, and management that supports you and makes wise decisions.
Yep. Yeah. That's part of the fundamentals. I mean, that's like the foundation before you build the house. You don't have that, house ain't going nowhere.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've mentioned so many topics here that we could splinter off on and discuss for I don't even know how long. There's just so many fascinating things. But for the purposes of time today, I just wanted to ask you just a couple quick questions here about what you've discussed so far. At any point, did you have interaction with Pablo Escobar? I know you came quite close to his people, but as the movie portrayed, there was a scene where he walked by you in a hotel. Did anything like that occur?
No, I think that his brother was in Paris, along with Moncada, because, well, I was introduced to someone who they said was Moncada, but there were other people who were there because they were moving on to Germany, where they were opening other accounts, and but not Pablo that I could see.
But you were so close to his trusted, for lack of a better term, staff, his people. You were so close in communicating with them. That in itself is an accomplishment that is just fascinating.
Had they let me go, Roberto would have protected me had I gotten to Medellin the way he wanted me to come with him to Medellin. But, I understand. I mean, we were only a year and a half. We started this thing a year and a half after the most tragic event in law enforcement history, the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Enrique Kiki Camarena. That was only 18 months prior to the time that this operation started. So,
wow, I did not realize that close proximity.
Yeah. And, in the second operation, which we didn't talk about at all, in the Book of the Betrayal, if your listeners read it, in that case, gosh, we were I just lost it. That's my senior moment. But in that particular case, now I'm dealing with the Cali cartel, but we had a corruption issue. But I had the opportunity in that case. Now I don't know what I was thinking. In the Betrayal, no one had been to Colombia, law enforcement wise, for 8 years working undercover. And they made an exception for me and gave me the opportunity. Now, since then, there's been lots of guys who've gone down there, guys and gals, who've gone down there and done undercover. But I was, for a break of 8 years, the first one to go. And that was
Wow.
probably 92 or 93, right around in that time frame.
Sure.
And anyway, so yeah, I was down there when they were hunting for Escobar, and Los Pepes were the vigilante group blowing, everything and everybody up.
Right.
But getting the opportunity to get down there, the reason that I was able to go down there is, unfortunately, I was bit by corruption in the case. There was a DEA task force officer who had been involved in an undercover capacity, who, unbeknownst to me, was already on the take years before I wound up dealing with him, and he outed me.
Oh.
So I went down and met with a number of people in Colombia, and the guy who he outed me to was in awe that I was there, and actually called him back and said, you lied to me. He can't possibly be a DEA agent. He's here. He's in Colombia. He's at the restaurant. And unfortunately, the corrupt task force officer said, no, I'm telling you, man, I guarantee you, maybe he went down there on his own. But the bottom line is, he's a cop. I know him. He's definitely a DEA agent.
Wow.
So, but anyway, we can talk about that maybe in a future one. But
Yeah.
that
I would love to do that at some point. Let me do this. Let me wrap it up here and ask you to just summarize, the aftermath, the arrest. How many folks were arrested and charged? What were the charges? And if you recall, what was there, a dollar amount of money seized in your overall operation, and an amount of drugs? I know it's so long ago, but just a summary of how it went down and concluded.
Yeah, drugs wise, the biggest hit was the 2,300 pounds that we got from Roberto, but I think in all it was like 3,400 pounds of coke that was seized. As far
That's
as
substantial.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the bank side, but the bank side of it really created the biggest amount of money, because so many accounts were seized. I mean, there were accounts of Rodriguez Gacha that were seized at the BCCI Luxembourg office that had $100 million, roughly $100 million.
Wow.
A money launderer by the name of Mauricio Vivas was the signature on the accounts. And I'd been given the opportunity to meet Mauricio Vivas, but the operation ended, and I didn't, but unfortunately. But so I would say, fines and this and that and the other thing, I've seen figures of like $600 million, because the bank wound up getting a huge fine. A lot of that we opened the door to things that were done with respect to the bank subsequently, that when the dust cleared, between our criminal cases and the Fed's cases on the bank, and I'd say you put it all together, it's somewhere in the vicinity of about $600 million.
Wow.
And I think the most important thing that happened, in my mind, the most important thing that happened as a result of this case was my being able to get inside the Bank of Credit and Commerce International and deal with about a dozen officers who, in law enforcement terms, we would say were corrupt because they knowingly laundered drug proceeds and proceeds from other illicit funds. And, we got them on tape and had them by the short hairs. And a couple of them went to trial, and it's not the longest sentence in the world, but 12 years for a banker behind bars. That's a pretty considerable amount of time that convinced them that they wanted to try to cooperate. And what grabbed me with them was their position that I later concur was truthful. And that is that they complained and said, we don't understand why you guys are picking on us. We're not doing anything the rest of the international banking community isn't doing. We just took the best techniques that we saw through our banking careers. We didn't always work for BCCI. I worked for Bank of America, Bank of Montreal, this one, that, and the other one. We took the best techniques and applied it to those clients within the private wealth divisions who had money-seeking secrecy from governments. So you could be a corrupt politician, you could be pilfering treasuries, an African leader pilfering treasuries, illegal arms dealer, drug trafficker, white-collar crime. Even the CIA, they when I was at BCCI, there were as many people representing intelligence agencies that were going through there, handling their banking, as there was anything else, because my financial advisor, Amjad Awan, who was the advisor to Manuel Noriega and to President Zia of Pakistan, also handled accounts for Bill Casey, who was the director of the CIA and who was sending money through BCCI to the Mujahideen to pay for weapons so they could fight the Russians in Afghanistan. That was a thing that really had me concerned. My big concern was, is the intelligence world going to find out that I'm inside this bank? And this is their piggy bank. And what is that going to do to me?
Right.
That was a big concern that I had. So
right. That and rightfully so. And for listeners, like, this is a incredibly significant investigation. Like, not only did you infiltrate this cartel and investigate and arrest numerous members of that, there's a flip side to that coin where, the bank and the banking industry, the international banking industry. So this is a fascinating case that was highly effective. And I just want, listeners to realize that. It's incredible. But let me transition to, just real quickly, a book resulted from this investigation. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I decided ultimately that I thought that the story of the Infiltrator was significant enough that it could carry a book, and really had no idea what I was doing. But I ultimately learned that what I needed was an agent, and so and an agency. So I happened to be working with Michael Mann, the movie director, as a technical consultant on the movie Miami Vice, working with Jamie Foxx, Colin Farrell, all those guys.
Sure.
And Michael said, you really need an agent. And he was friends with a lady who was an agent at Sterling Lord Literaristic. And I went to that agency. They signed me. Eventually, they got me a young, aspiring writer who helped me to put a book proposal together. I did that on a fee contract where I paid the writer $5,000, and we put a book proposal together. And that's far from a book. That's kind of an overview of the book, paragraphs describing each chapter, and then one detailed chapter, a marketing plan, and a bio. So that gets shopped around, and almost immediately an agency, a publisher buys it. And they asked me, do I have any other chapters? And I said, yeah, but this writer's never looked at them. I had like 5 or 6. So they said, send it to me. And I did. They looked at it, and the editor said, well, we like the way you write, and we think you can write the book, and we'll just provide you with editor help. So for that reason, I don't have a ghostwriter, and I wrote the book myself. And then I was fortunate enough that somebody in the film industry who works closely with a director by the name of Brad Furman, who did The Lincoln Lawyer and a bunch of other stuff. And so he showed my book to Brad, and Brad was very interested in it. I met with them. I gave him the rights for a period of a few months to negotiate trying to find a producer and financing. And that ultimately came together. And the next thing I know, we're on set, and Bryan Cranston's there, and a bunch of other people. So that's how that one went. And then afterward, a few years after the movie was out, I decided that I thought the second book, the second Undercover operation, deserved a book as well. I put a book proposal together. I sent it to Bryan Cranston. He looked at it and he said, wow, I think that this could be a good sequel. I wrote the book. He and I have been in communication along with some other people. It's a long journey. Whether we'll get to that and it'll actually happen, who knows?
Sure.
But it won't be if you're not trying.
Sure, absolutely. And that speaks volumes right there that you wrote that book. Many people have, like you said, a ghostwriter out there, but that was you doing it. So that in itself is an accomplishment. And then that Hollywood takes it and makes a quality, not just makes a movie, but makes a quality movie about it. That is an impressive feat. Tell the listeners, like, what are you doing now? Are you instructing in law enforcement? Are you speaking in any speaking engagements? What's going on?
Yeah, I do get to do instruction. I've done the HSI undercover school a couple of times. I do different types of training in the private sector, a lot of keynote speaking at conferences, and I enjoy doing that quite a bit. I do some master classes. I went out to Spokane, and I put a master class together for a law enforcement conference. The master class lasts about 4 hours, where we break it up into 4 different segments, and I cover everything from undercover training to building your undercover identities and money laundering and undercover techniques in defense tactics and that defense attorneys throw at undercover agents and undercover operations to try to embarrass them in front of a jury.
Valuable information.
Yeah, and then a 9-step thing on establishing rapport and communication with targets and the techniques that one can consider to use. None of this is a one-size-fits-all. You've got to take it's like going to a restaurant. Not everybody's going to like the filet mignon, but it's pretty good.
Right.
But so when I offer this, some of the things that I need to do, because I'm not an Amir Abreu, I need them on my menu. Amir probably could go with one item on his menu and everybody's going to like his menu. I don't have that talent. So, but not everybody's Amir Abreu. And so what we want to do is try to help officers to open their minds to all of the resources that they can pull on to try to prepare themselves as best as they can to do this kind of work and get out of it whole.
Outstanding. And I know you have a website where folks can learn a little bit more about you, contact you if they'd like, perhaps find out more information about your book. What's your website?
It's Robert Mazur, M-A-Z-U-R, no space, Robert Mazur, M-A-Z-U-R.com.
All right. Excellent. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention that I didn't cover?
Just one thing, and that is that, it's extremely important for me, for my brothers and sisters in law enforcement, to know that I realize that I didn't do this alone. I was blessed to be a part of a team, and I was blessed to earn the responsibility to be one of the several leaders on this team. My wheelhouse was putting the undercover operation together. Initially, I was a case agent, but once it became time for me to be undercover, I couldn't do that anymore. And there were a tremendous amount of extraordinarily talented people who made this thing happen. And if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
Sure. And that in itself is a sign of a great agent, a great person. You recognize that you didn't do it all by yourself, but you did a large part of it. Just having the humility to acknowledge that and mention your coworkers, that is fantastic. And that's essentially, again, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story with me and my listeners. I'm a 30-year law enforcement veteran myself, and today, for the past hour and a half or so, I've been on the edge of my seat listening to your story. It's fascinating, and it's relevant even today. Almost 40 years later, it's relevant. People can learn from your investigation. They can learn from listening to this podcast, and they can learn from you. And it's fantastic. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for doing what you did in that investigation. You made a substantial difference. You took some bad people off the street, and you did make our communities safer. So I want to recognize you for that, and I want to thank you for that. So again, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, listeners, for putting up with my stories.
Well, perhaps, like we mentioned, maybe we can do a second segment in the future. We'll see what comes in the future. But Bob, thank you. I appreciate your time, and stay safe out there. All right.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences, just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.